Hey guys, welcome back to Bear Mountain Builds. Now, have you been planning on building a workbench for your shop? Well, have you thought about building a modular workbench that can be long like this, and break apart like this, and wide like this, plus it's super sturdy. Now let's get started. So a lot of you have tighter workshops where you can't really fit a miter saw table or a big old assembly table in there, but that's where the design for a modular workbench really shines. It can be put together to be as long as a miter saw table or be as wide as an assembly table, and you can split it up into two different parts. It's really great, it's super simple, it's really sturdy, and it just uses a single piece of plywood and some 2x4s. Let's get started.
I'm cutting a piece of 3/4 inch sanded plywood into 4 equal sections with the grain running lengthwise. With each cut, I'm making sure to cut the overall length in half so that each piece is approximately 2 feet by 4 feet, but this will vary depending on the original size of the sheet.
Alright, so I got my top and bottoms all cut out, so I'm moving on to building my frame. So I have a bunch of 2x4s right here that I'm going to send through the planer just to crisp them up. You don't really need to plane 2x4s, I mean they're fine as is, so if you don't have a planer, don't worry about it, but I like doing it because it really turns an inexpensive board into something that looks pretty nice. So, let's keep going. So before I start cutting up those 2x4s to be the legs of my workbench, I thought I would take a second and just talk about workbench height. So this is my assembly table that I built several months ago, and I want my new workbenches to be the same height as this assembly table so I can use them all kind of in conjunction with each other. Now this table is 41 inches tall, which is a pretty tall table, but it's a great height for me when I'm 6'4". However, if you're 5'2", it's probably a little bit too tall for you. Thanks. So my plans will have this table at 41 inches, but if you're a little bit shorter or you want just a shorter bench in general, you'll have to take that into account. So let's go cut up some legs.
The legs are made up of a long and a short piece to form a lap joint on both ends. I'm starting with my short piece and covering it with glue using my glue roller, which makes applying glue over large surfaces much faster, and then positioning my long piece over it while using some offcuts as a spacer to make sure the lap joints are even. I'm driving my screws through the long piece since this will be the inside of the workbench.
Alright, so I have my leg pieces all assembled together, and I went ahead and cut out the stretchers, so it's time to start putting together the side frames. But first, I'm still growing my channel, so I really need every single one of you that's enjoying this video to hit the subscribe button. You'll be able to stay up to date on all of my videos, and it helps me out a ton, and I really appreciate it. So if you guys could just go ahead and do that now, I would think the world of you. Now, let's keep going. Alright, so I got my frame all set up, and now I wanted to talk about lap joints really quick, because lap joints are super easy to make. They're really strong because all that weight's going from wood to wood, and they're really simple to assemble. So for this first joint, I know a lot of you guys don't have a bunch of tools on hand, so I'm going to show you how I put it together with a carpenter square and a single clamp. Let's keep going.
First, I'm just snugging up the clamp so I can still adjust everything until the outside edges are perfectly flush. Then I ensure that I'm square with my carpenter square and fully tighten the clamp. I'm pre-drilling my holes to avoid splitting, and finally I recommend putting these screws where I do, since this will avoid interference with the pocket screws coming later in the build. For a tight fit, I'm using these construction wood screws that are designed to pull the boards together. For the rest of this build, I'll be using my 90-degree positioning clamps. I use them for everything. They are especially great for assembling joints and frames. They make the entire process much faster and easier. If you're into woodworking at all, I highly recommend picking up a set or two of these. I'll have them linked down below in the description.
All right, so I have my side frames all assembled, and I've gone ahead and cut out my cross pieces, so I have two lengths. One is shorter, that's gonna go on the ends like this, and then I have a longer length that's gonna go in the middle, and that's gonna brace the center of my top and my bottom. Now, moving forward, it's time to drill some pocket holes, so I'm gonna put 2 pocket holes on the ends of all my cross pieces, and then I'm also gonna go along and put some into the top of my cross piece, and those are gonna go up into my tops and my bottom. And I'm gonna do it along the side frame as well. Now, let's get drilling.
When you're doing pocket holes over a longer distance, I recommend making a measuring stick that marks the position of these holes. That way you'll be able to get the same hole positions everywhere without having to use a tape measure.
So I'm almost done drilling all my pocket holes, and I want to just take a second to talk about my jigs that I'm using. So this is my usual Kreg Pocket-Hole Jig that I use. It's great, I love it, and it works perfectly for me. Now, for some guys that probably don't do as much woodworking, this might be a little bit overkill. So I'm going to be using this budget version that's going to be great for you guys that are beginners. It's really affordable and it's super easy to use. So let's give this a shot.
When assembling the cross pieces, I'm using my 90-degree clamps to hold each piece square. It isn't required, but like I said earlier, it makes the whole process a heck of a lot easier and keeps everything perfectly square. For the internal cross pieces, I'm using 2 clamps just to hold everything flush to the frame.
All right, we're almost done. I've got the frames all put together and they are rock solid and super sturdy. So now we're moving on to attaching some casters. So this is my 4-inch caster. I use the same thing on my assembly table over there and they are rock solid. I really love these things. I'll have them linked down below. And what's gonna happen is I'm gonna be using this 5/16 by 1.5 lag screw, and I'm gonna be using only 3 of the holes for mounting up. And I'm gonna position my caster 3/4 of an inch away from this outside edge because I have some pocket screws coming through here. So that will dodge those, and let's get these assembled. All right, the wheels are on. It's time to notch out the plywood for the bottom platform, and then I'll mount everything with pocket screws for the top and the bottom. Let's keep going. Before I put my tops on, I usually measure the diagonals, and that will tell me if something is square. So if my measurements between the two diagonals are the same or very close, that means my frame's square, which this one is rock solid, so it's good to go. And I always like to start with putting the top piece on first, because that will force everything into fully square. So with everything clamped down, I can start loading in pocket screws.
I'm using pocket screws to mount the tops up because I think it gives it a super clean look. But if you don't want to do that, you can just as easily drive construction screws straight through the top and into the frame.
So for this one, I'll measure diagonally again. This diagonal is about 1/2 inch longer than the other one, which means I got to squeeze this diagonal in. So an easy way to do that is use a ratchet strap. We're good to go. So now with that intention, it's square, and then once I put my top on and anchor it with my pocket screws, it will hold everything all square.
Now, another thing to note is I'm not gluing these tops to the frame. That's because I want to be able to abuse these things and then be able to replace them later without destroying the frame. I'm cutting notches into the bottom of the piece that are 1/8 inch larger than the legs. As long as the frame is square, it should drop right in. If not, it might take a little extra persuasion. I sanded the tops to 220 and rounded all the edges.
All right, so I got my 2 workbenches all complete and they're ready to go. Now I can use these separately, totally fine right now, but the reason I built 2 was so I could use them in conjunction, so I can put them together like this and use it as like a miter saw table, or put them the long ways together and use it as like an assembly table. Now I don't want to have to do that with clamps all the time. So instead, I got these black latch clamps that I'm going to mount to the insides of my legs, so that way I can latch these 2 tables together like this. And it's going to be super easy and they'll be rock solid together. Now, let's get these attached.
It's super fast and easy to connect and disconnect these workbenches. Plus, these latches clamped a lot stronger than I thought they would. I had originally planned to use 2 sets on each side, but found that only 1 set was all that I needed for it to be rock solid.
This modular workbench is a great project for if you're just a beginner or if you have a small shop, so I highly recommend putting this in your shop. Now, as always, hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button for me and leave a comment. I love reading your guys' comments. They're awesome, so keep it coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.